Okay, class, if you got this as one of your recommended videos for the Unit 6 quiz, then it means you missed some question that had to do with outliers and what effect the outliers may have had on either the correlation or possibly even on the trend line. So let me actually go through a few things with you to help you get a better feel for the role that outliers play. So let me go ahead and take these, the data here, and do a quick scatter plot. All right, so you might get a question that does not have the trend line included. And, you know, in this case, we just see the scatter plot. We don't see the trend line included. And we might need to name the outlier with an ordered pair. Things you want to think about. Don't forget the parentheses. Like the outlier, first of all, is the point where you're going to see a linear pattern, but the outlier is a point that falls away from that linear pattern. So if we look here, it's pretty clear that these points are all headed in a positive linear pattern, but that this point down here is an outlier. It's not following the pattern that most of the other points are following. So, you know, typically you're just going to be given a scatter plot on the question, and you've got to figure out what the ordered pair is. So you won't have the raw data to go back to like I have here. What that means is you're just going to want to find the point and go straight down to the x-axis. So like this one looks like it corresponds to 6. And then if I go straight across, it's kind of right below 60. So if I had to make a good, you know, an educated guess on that one, I would just say the ordered pair would be like 6, and you have to say the x value first. So 6, 59. But remember, you have to actually write it as an ordered pair. And so that means you've got to put it in parentheses. Make sure you put the x value first and the y value second. But don't forget to type in those parentheses, and also don't forget to type in the comma. All right, so that would be naming the outlier, and that's, you know, possibly something you may have missed. Then it may ask you, you know, what effect does the outlier have on the correlation? And be careful to read the question whether they want the effect on the correlation or the trend line. Well, this one does not have the trend line in it. So what helps me there is to just imagine wrapping an outline around the points. And if the outlier is making there be more scatter, then it's going to weaken the correlation coefficient. Now, if it's a positive correlation, then to weaken it means to make it lower, to decrease it. But that does totally depend on whether we're talking positive or negative. So, you know, like in this case, that outlier is going to decrease the correlation coefficient, because otherwise, if it was not in there, I would have a much stronger positive relationship, linear relationship, and therefore without the outlier, we would expect that the correlation would get closer to +1, which is as strong as you can get for a positive relationship. So, you know, you got to do a lot of this visually, because as I said, I think I remember on these that you don't have the raw data, which means you're just visually looking at the scatter plot. But I want you to do things like imagine wrapping, you know, wrapping an outline around the points. Without that outlier right there, if I wrapped around the points, I would have a much skinnier pattern. You know, remember in seminar I talked about like skinny French fry, steak fry, baked potato, or a cookie. Well, as there gets more and more scatter, then it's weakening the correlation. But what we have to realize here is, because you're going to be picking choices with the with the outlier in there and without it. Well, without the outlier, and so just imagine this point's not in there. We would have a pretty tight linear pattern right in there. So a good educated guess for that would be something like in the 0.8 or 0.9 range. In fact, probably something in the 0.9 range, really close to 1, because it would be a tight pattern. With the outlier included, I don't want you to think that it's going to drop to 0, because most of the points still show a strong pattern. This is just 1 point out of all the others. But it would at least drop it from, say, like a 0.9 or something like that to, you know, something like a 0.7, maybe a 0.6. But in other words, it's still going to be, you know, a moderate or maybe even still a strong relationship with the outlier in there. You know, you just have to realize it's not just 1 point. Now, if the scatter looked like an entire cookie, then, you know, you would have a correlation near 0. But this is just 1 point, and without it, it's a really strong relationship. So even though you're not going to have the raw data, I just want to show you what's going to happen. So if we calculate the R value, the correlation, and I'm going to go do equal CORREL, and then click and drag down my X's, comma, click and drag down my Y's. All right. So, yep, so with the outlier in there, it's at 0.47, actually a little bit lower than I thought, but it's still in the moderate range. So what I'm trying to say is, you know, with the outlier in there, certainly it's going to weaken the correlation, and in this case, make it a lower number because it's a positive relationship, but it's not going to send it all the way down to 0, okay? Now, let's go ahead and let me show you what happens if I take out the outlier. And remember, this one seemed to be about around 6,59. In fact, now that I've got the raw data here, it's 658 right here. I'm going to click on this row, and I am going to come up here and delete it. And then I'm going to rerun the correlation. In fact, Excel already reran it for me. That's so nice. So with the outlier excluded, notice on the scatter plot it's gone. The correlation is way up higher, closer to 1 like we suspected. It's actually at 0.86 roughly, so close to 0.9. So that's just showing the effect of the outlier, but mainly helping you to see that if it's just one outlier and the rest of the points show a strong pattern, then the outlier in there is not going to drop it down to 0. It just dropped it to like 0.4 or something. It was still in the moderate range. All right, so that's something definitely I wanted to show you. Let's see what else you may have missed here with outliers. All right, yeah, let's actually look at the trend line, the effect of the trend line with the outliers. And, you know, that's just where you have to be careful if it's wanting you to look at the effect that the outlier has on the correlation like we just looked at, or look at the effect of the line. All right, so let me go ahead and add, excuse me, let me go ahead and add the 658 back in there. Delete that. Okay, and I'm going to put in something like this, 120. All right, new scatter plot. So insert scatter plot. Oops, I forgot to highlight. Highlight, insert, scatter. All right, this time we really see two outliers. There's one here at 5,120. There's one here at 658. All right, if I bring in the trend line, okay, you see the trend line with both the outliers in there. Well, one thing to notice about this scenario is, you know, certainly the outliers are weakening the correlation, because if you wrap an outline around the points, it's creating more scatter. But if the question wants to know what is the effect that the outlier or outliers have on the trend line, then if you get a scenario where there's actually two outliers, but they're on opposite sides of the trend line and roughly even the same distance away from the trend line, like if I look at vertical distance here, they're roughly the same distance away. Well, what you would want to realize is they're sort of balancing out the trend line then, and if we remove both of them, the net effect on the trend line is probably not going to be much of an effect at all. Now, if there was just one outlier, then it would change the trend line, because the trend line is going to try to move closer to the outlier. But when you have two like this that are sort of balancing each other out on opposite sides of the trend line, it's probably not going to have that much of an effect. So let me now, I'm going to go ahead and put this up here. Let me now go ahead and take out these 2 points. And notice the trend line really did not move that much at all. If you watched it, I had like just watch the video over here at this line. If I go back in and add 658 and then 5 and 120. And actually the scaling is making it look different. So let me go ahead and show you on another sheet to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm doing the scatter plot again without the outliers, and I'm going to add in the trend line. Okay, and let me copy this. And let me paste this, Control V. All right, so here's what we're looking at. And if I'm trying to now scale it close to the same thing. Well, look at the trend line. It's kind of right between these 2 points, a little almost between these two and almost between these two. If you look over here, same thing. It's really almost the exact same trend line. See how it's just barely below that point, a little above this, a little above that. So it is almost the exact same trend line. So what I want you to notice is when there were 2 outliers on opposite sides, the net effect on the trend line is, basically no significant change. But on the correlation, there would have been a change. Like, let me go ahead and show you the correlation. Equals CORREL. And this is the data set with the outliers in there. All right, so with the outliers, correlation 0.45. Not really that surprising because both these outliers make the scatter much bigger among the points. All right, then I'm going to go to sheet 2 that did not have the outlier included, or not have the outliers. Remember, there were 2 of them. And do calculate correlation, click and drag there. Click and drag there. Much higher, 0.85, 0.86, much higher. So, you have to be careful about whether the question is asking what effect the outliers have on the correlation or what effect the outliers have on the trend line, because those are actually asking 2 different things.